Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think that, and thanks to all the speakers, we share, I think, similar ways of views of looking at, the current phenomena which we are witnessing. And not to repeat, I think, what the other speakers have said, I think that how we address this or try to address right-wing extremism or like Islamophobia and racism is by looking at it from a very structural approach. And our argument basically is that we talk today about right-wing extremism, Islamophobia, and so on and so forth, but the issue here is white supremacy. And that is the main issue which we need to tackle. And right-wing extremism, which is a term that we prefer not to use. We prefer to call it plain old racism and fascism. That is what it is. I think also by referring to it as right-wing extremism, we also allow for others to say, well, there is also left-wing extremism. But I mean, on the one hand, we have people who are arguing and calling for social justice, and on the other hand, we have people who are saying we want to kill some people, we want to kill and oppress other people. So we need to call it what it is. This is just another phase of fascism and racism, plain old fascism, just using different tools. And so when we look at white supremacy as we prefer to see it as part of a structure which goes beyond just color of the skin, but a structure which is founded on racialism, founded on capitalist, extractivist ideologies, and on patriarchy as well. So this is an entire structure which we are dealing with. And today what we are faced with in Europe, whether this is mainland Europe or the UK, is basically a moment of crisis. We often talk about migration crisis, quote unquote, and other crises, but what we are faced today is a crisis of European identity, a crisis of Europe. Because for a very long time, on the one hand, Europe pretends to want to address its history with colonialism, its history with enslavement, its history with, Islamophobia is an old phenomenon. In Europe, we are talking of 1,000-year phenomena, so this is not a new thing. And on the other hand, Europe still does not want to address these issues. I mean, you just need to look around the UK, or you look around Europe, and you're still going to see statutes and names of streets and buildings named after enslavers, named after genocidaires, named after some of the worst people in history. We wouldn't say the same thing about figures like Hitler. It's unacceptable to name a street after Hitler, but we still have streets and places named after the likes of Churchill, after the likes of Leopold, after the likes of Napoleon Bonaparte. These are people that, so you see that we have two different forces. On the one hand, you have this pretense that we are trying to do something about fascism and racism, and on the other hand, it is structurally embedded in all facets of European institutions and ways of life. And so what we have is a crisis of identity at this moment, and the right-wing extremism, or if I would rather say the fascism and the Islamophobia we are facing, is just another moment where this crisis reaches a moment of crescendo. And Europe needs vehicles to be able to justify this fascism and this racism. So liberal vehicles in order to be able to justify this. And I think as you mentioned earlier, one of them is liberal Islamophobia. So trying to present this as an issue of human rights, as an issue of democracy, as an issue of feminism. On the other hand, not on the other hand, but also one of these other vehicles is anti-migrant rhetoric, which is just simply racism. This is also another vehicle through which we are having the discourse on fascism and racism, because, well, we are talking about all of these irregular migrants, we are talking about the smugglers, the traffickers, those who are crossing the channels, or those who are crossing the Mediterranean Sea, or coming from Eastern Europe. So we have all of this anti-migrant racism and rhetoric, which is another vehicle. And of course, we also have fascist groups as well, borrowing the rhetoric of class struggle. You know, this is about resources. This is about people taking away our resources. This is about lack of social welfare and services. And at the same time, we cannot remove this current phase as well from the ongoing genocide in Gaza, because the ongoing genocide in Gaza has been used to justify the policing of communities, especially Muslim communities, communities that are perceived as Muslims, communities that are perceived as pro-Palestine or as pro-justice movements, human rights organizations, migrant-led organizations, organizations that work on migration. So this whole machinery of oppression, of using different kinds of styles and techniques, of course, including the use of how is it called again? Surveillance on this community. So what we are facing currently is just one of those moments where where it is a crisis of European identity. And of course, this is not the first time, and it's not going to be the last time, unless we actually address what the central issue is, and that is white supremacy and the structure of whiteness. And of course, you'd see in the recent elections in Europe, you'd see the rise of groups like the Rassemblement National in France, you see the rise of people like Meloni in Italy, of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. We also saw the EPP, which is the largest group in the European Parliament, for example, flirting with far-right ideologies as well, and we saw how they gained a lot of votes by also flirting with these far-right ideologies. So we see that in this moment of crisis, we see these different vehicles through which white supremacist ideas are almost liberalized or banalized, in a sense, borrowing your discourse. And you'd hear the liberals, and because I think it's important to distinguish here between liberals and leftists, and you hear a lot of liberals and centrists say, well, this is just a phase, this is uncommon in Europe, the right is probably going to rise, but soon enough, we are going to have, for example, we can see here in the UK with the Labour government, and people are like, now we have a Labour government, they are not as racist as the Tories, although I think that they are equally racist. They are just simply better at politicking, to be honest. And the question I think we need to ask ourselves is, why do we continuously have these phases, and why do we allow ourselves to be gaslit as these are phases, and with the right mobilization, we are going to push back on the right, and I think the discourse that we need to be having is, how do we address white supremacy in all of its different forms and in all of its different manifestations? And I think that this is where using intersectionality as a framework of analysis is really very important. How do we build alliances across different groups that are marginalized, whether this is the queer community, whether this is the Muslim or perceived as Muslim communities, whether this is the Roma community, the Black community, whether as well this is the Jewish community, the climate justice community as well. How do we build broad alliances, grassroots broad alliances across different issue areas, and really confront head-on what the major issue is, which is white supremacy and the institution of whiteness? And of course, I'll be more than happy to get some questions from you or to engage in some kind of a discussion, because this is a collective effort that we need to engage in at INA. We are producing a paper on critical whiteness, which we will be releasing at the end of this year, which also really looks at this from the framework of white supremacy. We talk about anti-racism, but we also need to talk about whiteness as an institution. And aside of INA, outside of INA, I'm also writing a book chapter on the EU single market as a racial capitalist instrument of hierarchies. So this is information, I think, and resources that would share at some point in time. Thank you.